Welcome to a review of Chapter 8, Designing a Research Project, which of course you and your group are already in the middle of doing. We know that some of the things that are important in this process is kind of the introduction to the topic. Is the topic important? Is it relevant? Do you have an interest in it? And we already began doing that in this class here. We particularly used each of the movies as a jumpstart to kind of develop a topic to be investigated. Once you have done that, of course, the question is which methodology will you be using? Then next, the data analysis. What is the time frame for the study? And in our case, maybe not as relevant, but in larger studies done by university professionals and professional researchers, budget is clearly something that is also relevant. And as I already mentioned, planning is based on whether it is a qualitative or a quantitative study. We are already far ahead with task number one, which is related to stating the topic, the problem, and the questions in the event of a quantitative research methodology may be also a hypothesis. Um, there's also, of course, in task number one, the whole question about is this study relevant? What limitations and delimitations are there to the study? And you have already, with your group, been working on that on the template provided for the class. Uh, the next step, task two, you have also already been involved with, which is beginning to outline the library research. And one of the important things here is to be able to identify the correct descriptors, which eventually will help you in identifying related literature that forms the foundation and also actually helps us inform the research project itself. As we begin developing the literature review, it is important to kind of two general ways to look at this is moving from very general types of literature to more specific types of literature, and also moving from early research and then to more recent research. And that raises the question about, uh, you know, how old can research be that you are using in your research project? Typically, in most situations, people say that your research can actually not be, your articles cannot be more than 5 to 7 years old in order for them to be really relevant. Think about that any published research most likely was collected 2 to 3 years before it was published. So as you're beginning to look at literature, that is more than 5 years old, you are in a situation where the data was collected 8, 10 years ago and therefore might not be incredibly relevant. Of course, there are situations where we will have to use older data, particularly in situations where maybe our topic has not been researched for a number of years. There are fads in research, at least paid for research, as there are for many other things. So many times, large bodies of research on a particular topic emerges as a result of federal funding opportunities. For instance, in the early to mid 90s, there was a high emphasis on character education, and therefore you find a body of research from that period of time. Then suddenly the high stakes testing came in and kind of displaced everything. And then within the last couple of years, there has been an emergent field of study that is beginning to look at the notion of can you teach character or can you teach other things that are just as important as test taking strategies. The Angela Duckworth study related to grit and perseverance is an example of this new field that is beginning to emerge as an interest for research. The next thing is important is to identify needed data and their sources. I cannot stress how important it is to figure out and determine what data will I be collecting in order to answer my research question. So What type of data? Do I collect it through observations? Do I collect it through surveys? Do I collect it through standardized tests? Or do I collect it through observations or interviews? Of course, the two latter fall much more in the qualitative research tradition, where the first ones I mentioned falls in the quantitative research tradition. Many times when we are looking at practice research, which is what we will be doing, it is recommended to use a mixed method, collecting both some quantitative information as well as some qualitative information. It tends to give us more practical significance in our classroom. So I will highly recommend, as you are beginning to look at the data that you will be collecting, that you consider using a mixed methodology. Secondly, it is also important to be planful about what are the sources of my data. What does that mean? It simply means, who are the participants in my study? Do I use an existing classroom? Do I select a number of students in my classroom? Some of you are proposing research topics that involves school-wide issues. Do you collect data from one school, or do you collect data from multiple schools? So basically, when we are talking about the data sources that are needed, where do we get the information from, and who are the sources of information? Task number 4 is just as important, listing the steps needed to complete the study. So here again, what are my sampling procedures? What is it that I'm going to do? So for instance, if you're going to use a flipped classroom approach, are you collecting data before you flip the classroom on some kind of a standardized or a teacher developed assessment? And then after you have flipped the classroom, how long do you flip the classroom for? Is it for one unit? Is it for one topic? What types of assessments do you do? What is it that you expect of the participants? And what are the methods for you to ensure that you get quality data? I cannot tell you how many research projects I have been involved with over the years in classes like this one, where one of the most challenging situations for students is to collect meaningful data. So luckily in this semester we get a trial run, because you will actually not be collecting the data. In the second part of this class, you actually will be collecting data, you will be analyzing data, and you will be reporting on real data. This class here, we will not do that. So I moved into task number 5, but again, if you're using some kind of data collection instruments, it could be that you will be using an existing assessment. It could be that if you might be studying student engagement as a result of being involved in problem-based learning. There might be existing engagement surveys that exist out there, or you may develop a survey yourself. All these surveys or data collection instruments have to be predetermined before any data collection begins. If you're going to do observations, let's say that you will be doing observations of untasked behavior, you must develop the format for what untasked behavior looks like, how you will record it, and how frequently you will be collecting untasked data. Task number 6, again, I want to stress this. The type of data analysis that you will be using is determined before you collect your data. So it is really important, if you use qualitative data, you have to describe and make a decision about how are you going to collect the data. Are you going to do observations? Are you going to make notes after you have done observations, or are you going to conduct interviews? If you conduct interviews, how are you going to record these interviews? Are you going to take notes as you conduct the interview? Are you going to tape record them or digitally record them? Or are you going to video record them? Once you have that, what are you going to do with that data? Are you going to transcribe it and how you're going to analyze it. If you collect information about tests, what types of analysis will you be using? Statistical analysis will you be using afterwards? Will you be looking for correlations, or will you possibly be using a t-test or a multiple t-test in order to compare means? Also, then think about the appropriate format for reporting your findings and for writing up your research. Based on this kind of generic format, I am also providing a template for the class which outlines the types of elements that are essential, the types of headings or topics that should be discussed in the research report. Here are a couple of links for how you might be finding additional information in writing reports on the internet. Thank you.